Well, hello, everyone. It is always a blessing again to be with you on this 29th day of May 2020. We want you to know that we appreciate you being on the show. We value your presence. We appreciate you chiming in. Thank you for being with us on this Friday. We are so thankful for the opportunity to talk with you. We were in our discussion about You Are God's Love Bank on yesterday. And today we're going to continue that in part two. But let me tell you a little bit about what God's Love Bank is really all about. And I like to do that during the time that we're waiting for people to come on to the show. God's Love Bank is a framework of thinking. It provides for you 15 systematic spiritual tools of thinking to help you to grow out of your old self into your new self. God's Love Bank is also a value-oriented framework for teaching. It's a program for teaching, and it provides for you 15 systematic core values of Jesus called New Self-Love accounts. And then God's Love Bank is also a program for living. It's a purpose-oriented program for living. And so what it does is help you to own what your old self-love is. And everybody has old self-love. Then after you own what your old self-love is, then you can put off the old self and put on the new self. And that's growing out of your old self into your new self. And let's face it, spiritual growth is absolutely essential for you to receive happiness, real happiness on this side of eternity, and joy on the other side. So what we have to do is grow out of the old self into the new self. And that's what God's Love Bank is really all about. God's Love Bank is the program that provides you with these framework of thinking, with a program for living and a curriculum for teaching. And it's important for you to own that you are God's Love Bank. And we talked about that yesterday. The importance of owning that you are God's Love Bank cannot be overemphasized. And the reason I say that is because you should be concerned about God's Love Bank and care about God's Love Bank because you are God's Love Bank. Your spirit, your soul, and your body function and operate as God's Love Bank. Let me give you a little bit of history here. What happened in the fall, when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, when sin occurred, the fall occurred. When the fall occurred, it gave birth to a phenomenon called old self. Now, the old self really did not have any place to reside. So it found itself residing in our original self. And our original self is our spirit, soul, and body. Genesis chapter 2, verse number 7. God formed man from the dust of the ground. He breathed into man the breath of life, and man became a living soul. I want everybody who are listening right now, you notice how I can flow with that. I can articulate that because I have owned that I am God's Love Bank. And I do business in the bank of my soul every day. Because when I do business in the bank of my soul on earth, I'm also transacting business in heaven. Because God got a heavenly bank account that keeps record of every transaction and everything that we're doing on this earth. And so it's important then. So I then own that I am God's Love Bank. Now, why is that important? Well, when the fall occurred, the old self corrupted our original self. Then God sent Jesus to put in bondage the old self. He crucified the old self on the cross. Romans chapter 6 and verse number 5 and 6. When he crucified the old self on the cross, he relieved us. He freed us from the bondage that the old self has been in our life ever since the fall. And so then Jesus taught us that our spirit, soul, and body function and operate as a bank. In fact, as God's Love Bank. So that's what we've been talking about when we talk about you are God's Love Bank. Well, good to see a number of you today. Good to see you, Ali. Good to see you, Roz, Kenan. Good to see you, Lindsay. Good to see you, Sharika. Good to see you, Cora, and others that are on the show. So today we're going to continue what we began talking about on yesterday. And if you remember, we talked about the notion that you are uh, you are God's love bank, and that you function and operate as God's love bank. So we started out by talking about you were created spirit, soul, and body. You were created a threefold spiritual being. That is not only your original gift, it is your original self. God gave you the goods from the very beginning to be a spirit, to have a soul, and to live in the body. When Jesus came on the scene, Jesus then taught us that our spirit, soul, and body function and operate as God's love bank. And the reason that's important is because he had to recreate what happened in the fall with our threefold spiritual being when the old self corrupted the threefold spiritual being. And then he then began to control and dominate people's lives. So God sent Jesus. And when Jesus got here, he taught us in Matthew chapter 25, verse 14 through 32, and in Luke chapter 19, verses 15 through the following of that chapter. And we find it in Romans, and we find it in Colossians, and we find it in Ephesians. Paul said, you were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self and its deceitful lust, and to be made new in the spirit of your mind, and put on your new self, which was created in true righteousness and holiness. And so we learned then that in Colossians chapter 3, verse 9, 10 from the NIV again, stop lying to yourselves and to one another, since you have taken off your old self and its practices, and be made new in the spirit, or rather created in the true image of Christ Jesus our Lord. So what we have established then is that you are, in fact, God's love bank, not only in theory, but also in fact. Now, we also learned that in God's love bank, you have a spirit, and your spirit is the inside teller of God's love bank. Your body is the outside teller of God's love bank, and your soul is the bank itself. As we learn more about this, we're going to learn that there's a battle going on with your old self and your new self for control and domination of your soul. Because inside of your soul, you have a unique gift, and that gift helps you to do things at your absolute best with the least amount of effort. And the devil does not want you to live in your new self. So he tries to keep you preoccupied in your old self. And that's the purpose of the old self. He is a thief who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's given us background on what we kind of discussed on yesterday and what we've been learning. Now let's go further. Now, we do business in the bank of our soul in two ways. We either make love deposits or love withdrawals. When we talk about love deposits, we're talking about all words, thoughts, feelings, actions, and deeds, which we invest I probably lost now.
Oh, there you are. No. Okay, you're on.
I'm on? Okay. Hey, everybody, it's good to see you back. We got lost there for a moment. As you can tell, I'm not at home anymore. I am in my daughter's house. My grandbaby is up and Kim is at it. So let me see if I can get back, okay, where we left off. Everybody see us? Okay. Okay, so what we learned then is that you have 5 choices that you can make to build your old self and your new self. Now, here's what we're going to do today. What we're going to do today is we are going to take back off where we left off on the last time we met. If everybody is back there, somebody communicate to me and let me know that you're back, that you're still there. Okay, all right, you're back. All right. So here's what we're going to do today. We want to go back to some personalities that we talked about on yesterday. For example, Forrest Gump, Jenny, Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe. And what we want to do is we want to walk through how you can put off the old self and put on the new. And what we're going to do then is I'm going to rehearse that and we'll talk about it. All right. Okay. So we know that what happens when you make a love deposit in the bank of your soul, it's always based on faith, hope, love, purpose, and good news. Now that's very important because I have to be able to recalibrate my thoughts sometime and make sure that the thought is based on faith, hope, love, purpose, and good news. But the first thing we got to do is realize you got to start with your words. Instead of allowing your words to be withdrawals, make sure your words are deposits. Don't say you got a problem. Say you have a purpose opportunity. Don't say you broke, busted, and disgusted. Say you are fishing in deeper water now. Or say you temporarily out of cash. Don't say you're old and all worn out. Say I'm fishing in deeper water. You got to make sure you turn all your words. Then when you have a thought, make sure you turn your thoughts, your feelings, your words, your actions, and your deeds into love deposits. But I want to spend time today on feelings. Someone says that feelings gone unchecked will show up again. If you don't address your feelings can control your words and your thoughts, as well as your actions and your deeds. Your feelings are important, and therefore that's why the old self will take you back to your old self, first greatest pain, so that it can use to get you to stay in your old self. So let's talk further now. Let's talk about some personalities here. Elvis Presley. What was his home base? I think somebody said on yesterday his home base was abandonment or something like that. What was Elvis Presley's home base? You know, when we think about it, okay, we can learn more about him by, first of all, going back to his first greatest pain. So let's not deal with Elvis Presley. Let's deal with Marilyn Monroe. What do? First of all, they never owned that they had an old self. That's why they spent their lives being controlled by the old self until ultimately it killed them or they took their own lives. But let's talk about Jenny in Forrest Gump. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to look at Jenny's life and we want to see how we can turn her withdrawals into deposits. And I'm going to go further here. While we're doing it, let's look at Forrest Gump's life. Okay. And then we'll look at Antoine Fisher's. Okay. So what we want to do from there is think about those 3 personalities: Forrest Gump, Antoine Fisher, and Jenny. Well, the first thing we got to do is we got to start doing business in the bank of our soul. All right. We have covered 5 core values of Jesus already this year. Okay. I want to start with January, or let's start with new self-honesty, and let's talk about Jenny. Okay, now we do know that Jenny was in a family where her father was abusive, physically, emotionally, mentally, and sexually. And Forrest Gump was her boyfriend. And they discovered that this father was very abusive. Okay, so how do we help Jenny to put off her old self and put on her new? She first of all got to start with being honest with herself. New self-honesty. Why? Because new self-honesty is the honesty and truthfulness with the Holy Spirit in my single most important relationship with God, which affects every significant relationship in my life. My relationship with Jesus, my father, my mother, my spouse, my children, my brothers and sisters, and my own life also. What's the point, Brother Roach? In order for Jenny to put off her old self, she got to come to a point where she will be honest and truthful with herself. Now, when she started being honest and truthful with herself, she'd have to admit that she was sexually and emotionally and physically abused by her father. That's where we get into the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you are going to put off your old self, you got to be honest with yourself. And that's called new self-honesty. Now let's take Forrest Gump. Now, Forrest Gump's father left. His home base was abandonment. And I was talking to my wife yesterday, and I said that her mother, Forrest Gump's mother, was in and out of his life. But when we think about it, she was the only steady person in his life. He just kept abandoning and coming back, abandoning and coming back. Well, how can we help Forrest Gump to live in his new self? We're going to have to use new self-honesty. He got to be honest enough to admit, my father left me, and he left. And when he left, I concluded that the people I love always leave me, so my home base becomes abandonment. Well, now let's go back to Antoine Fisher. Now, we learned that Antoine Fisher's home base was abandonment at first, but then he had a greater pain before he turned 13, where he was sexually and emotionally and physically abused. So the pain of his abuse bumps his home base of abandonment to his first base. And so now he operates out of abuse and abandonment. Now, in the new self, that means he operates out of purpose and atonement. And Jenny, that would be hers would be abuse, and hers was abandonment too. It's very interesting that that Jenny's home base was abuse and abandonment. Forrest Gump's home base was abandonment and worthlessness. Now, what you'll see happening then is now he overcompensates and controls, trying to get Jenny, while Jenny abandons, disengages, and denies. And it gives you the whole plot of the story of Forrest Gump. Now, once you begin to be honest with yourself, where you own your old self-love, you're going to need courage. And that's why the next core value is called new self-courage. The courage to stand for what I believe is right and not follow the crowd based on what's written in the word of God, even when it's unpopular, inconvenience, or when I have to stand alone with the Holy Spirit. You have to have enough courage to own everything that's happened in your life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And a lot of times people never grow spiritually because they do not take the time to be honest with themselves and then have the courage to stand for what you believe is right and not follow the crowd. Your old self-love is unique to you. So you got to be courageous enough to own it after you are honest enough to admit it. And then that brings us to the next level. Okay, what are you talking about, Brother Roach? I'm talking about how to put off the old self and put on the new. And for many people, this is a process. You can do it throughout the whole year. Remember, we learned the spirit changes instantly, the soul changes progressively, and the body changes ultimately. So during the whole year, you are doing business in the bank of your soul, and you are learning how to be honest with yourself, how to have courage. But when you begin to start being honest with yourself and you start having courage, you're going to have some forgiveness. You're going to have to forgive yourself and others who may have hurt you. For example, Jenny would have to be able to forgive her father or she would never be free. And Forrest Gump would have to be able to forgive his father, or he will never be free. Antoine Fisher would have to be able to forgive the guardian, the foster care mother who sexually abused him. And then he has to forgive his mom and father for abandoning him. Well, how do you do that? It's called new self-forgiveness. The forgiveness I received from God's concept of forgiveness, and from repenting for closing my spirits with false substitutes, knowing that I need to compassion to keep my spirit open to others, to cancel their debt, to release them from bondage, and to set them free to go. Basically, what it gets down to is, once I start being honest with myself and I admit everything that's happened in my life and I own it, then I got to have enough courage to own it, and enough courage to work on putting it off. But then I'm going to need forgiveness. And God's concept of forgiveness is broader than any other concept. And if I don't forgive myself, no matter what happened, see, a lot of us blame ourselves. People who were sexually abused like Jenny, people who were abandoned like Forrest Gump, he blames, or they can blame themselves when you're not the one who did anything wrong. You just had an experience that causes your old self to kick in. And when your old self got involved, now the old self will try to wreck, rule, and ruin your entire life. That's why you need to make sure you have new self-honesty, new self-courage, new self-forgiveness. Then you're ready to have what is called power. You're ready to allow the power of God to work in your life. That's called new self-power. Now, let me see if I got it right. First, in order to put off my old self, I got to be honest. So I have to have new self-honesty. Then I got to have enough courage to keep on pursuing and owning it. That's called new self-courage. Then I'm ready to forgive myself, and I'm ready to forgive those who abuse me or misuse me, or who caused the pain that caused me to have my old self-love home base. And if you don't forgive that person, you can stay in bondage for years. I stayed in bondage with my old self, with my father, something like 25 years, and I didn't really know it. And my old self was driving me because he was an alcoholic, and I blamed him, and I didn't forgive him until later when I learned what exactly was going on with my old self. So now you need new self-power. Why new self-power? It's the power to choose your own response to what happened. See, it's not what happened that is most important, it's your response to what happened. Okay, so as you go about choosing your response to what happens, then you can be proactive enough to change what happens by turning everything that happened to you into a deposit rather than a withdrawal. I don't know how many of you are following me, but I'm trying to show you the process of how you can put off the old self and put on the new, no matter what your old self-love home base is or was. Okay, so now you got power to choose your own response to what happens to you in life. And that brings us to the point where we are right now, where we are at that point where, just give me a minute here. Now we are at May, new self-purpose. And for the last week and a half, I've been talking to us about new self-purpose. The purpose God had in mind when he created me with a unique and special gift, which gives me the capacity to use my gift to discover God's purpose in my life and find good and purpose in everything in life, including my problems. Okay, so here's what we got. All right. You start out with your old self. Then you learn that you have a new self. Then you learn you got a new self-purpose. So that's how you can put off the old self and put on the new. All right, now let's go back to Jenny. Let's go back to Forrest Gump, and let's go back to Antoine Fisher. Okay, Forrest Gump's home base was abandonment with a first base of worthlessness. So he disengages and he denies. And then when he gets desperate, he becomes dishonest. So he was constantly in and out of his life with Jenny and with his mother. And then he would overcompensate. You remember how he would play ping pong and how he would do things? He would overcompensate. He would leap tall buildings in a single bow. He would control things. See his old self? Now, the opposite of that would be his new self. which would be atonement, and then greatness. So his oneness in his atonement is very important. And the way you keep the atonement is, see, atonement is motivated by number one motivation. And guess what it is? Presence. People with the new self-love home base of atonement wants presence. Why do they want presence? They want presence so they can live in the moment. And when they live in the moment, then they can enjoy being fun, having fun, being playful, and they can do all of that. But what really drives them is presence, living in the moment. And that's very important to people with the home base of abandonment. So if Forrest Gump stayed present with himself, he could have stayed, he would have been still long enough to be with his mom and be with Jenny. And then if Jenny had owned her old self-love home base of purpose in her new self, with a first base of abandonment, which would be atonement, what she would have done is she would have started focusing on why she was alive, why she exists. Even though she had been abused sexually by her father or emotionally by her father, she now can have a purpose, and she can spend the rest of her days fulfilling her purpose, helping other young women or other young girls not experience what she experienced. Do you see what we're talking about? Okay, so let me see. Let's get some comments then. Okay, I want to get some comments from some people. Any questions or any comments that you may have, if you'll bring that up, we will talk about that even at this point. Okay, Lynn Jackson, which is really usually Randy Jackson, feeling buried alive will never die. What did he just say? Feelings buried alive will never die. What does he mean by that? I know what Brother Jackson means by that because we talked about that. When you don't deal with your feelings, when you're not honest with your feelings, and you don't have enough courage to deal with your feelings, and you don't forgive feelings that have been wounded or hurt, they never die. They come back and haunt you. And in the old self, they begin to drive you and make you do things that you normally would not do because the old self is controlling you. And so that point that Brother Jackson is making right there is extremely important. You got to deal with feelings. You got to turn old self-love feelings into deposits. That's a good point, Brother Jackson. All right. Here's Jerry Graham. He says, how does my account look if there are no deposits? There is nothing to withdraw. Okay, let me see what I think I hear what you're saying. He says, how does a person's account look when they don't have love deposits in there? Well, you're bankrupt. See, basically, in all of your accounts, you start out at old self, you're bankrupt, then you greatly deprived, then you're deprived, then you're satisfactory. Then you go to the new self, you enhance, then you are greatly enhanced, and then you can live with abundance. So when a person don't have any love deposits in the bank of their soul, then the old self just totally controls their life. That's what happened to Jenny. Just look at what happened to her. She lived a life being driven all of her life by her abuse and her abandonment because she did not know how to make love deposits in the bank of her soul. Same is true with Elvis Presley. Same is true with Marilyn Monroe. Same is true with Antoine Fisher. See, when we don't do business in the bank of our soul, the old self will come in, take control, dominate the bank of our soul, rob us of our gift, and cause our life to be frivolous and in some cases less than meaningful. So that's a good point there. We appreciate that point. Let's see what we got here. Crystal says, she says, hi, here is my 12-year-old nephew. And he says, hi. We appreciate you, Crystal, and we appreciate your nephew. Here is Kenan. He says something else. Let's see what he says. Just getting feedback. Kenan says, and it's hard for me to read this, so I'm trying to. It's interesting. Seems that Forrest Gump never had a problem forgiving Jenny. He was overcompensating, trying to get Jimmy because of worthlessness. He was abandoning her. He had problems, but he disengaged from his real feelings. That's what happens with people with the home base of abandonment. They can disengage and deny from their real feelings and sometimes be dishonest. He really forgave her, but he really never dealt with the feelings of the pain that he was experiencing. So obviously he just buried them. And there's a perfect example. Feelings buried alive will come back to haunt you. Interesting. All right, here is Randy Jackson again, and he makes this statement. Dr. Roach, would you consider spending in the next week episode sharing how God's Love Bank might help give some perspective on the current racial unrest we are dealing with in our country? That is something that we certainly need to talk about, but we can. Let's stop for a moment and just think about some things. What is happening with African American people right now? They're in pain, and they are in more pain because they have seen what has happened to the fellow who the police officer put his knee in the neck of this gentleman, and the man cried out, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe." He cried out for his mother, and then the man died. What's happening with African Americans? What would make people go out and risk their life and be looting and rioting and breaking in and expressing their pain? It's because it has happened so much over the years that the pain activates their old self. Now, if they don't know anything about the new self and the old self, they're going to act out in their old self. Now, what's happening is the police officers come along and they are concerned too. They have a responsibility of maintaining order, but at the same time, they got a responsibility of protecting lives and protecting property. So now they're scared and they're on edge, and the people who are out there in pain are on edge, and the government is on edge. And then we hear somebody putting on Twitter, when looting starts, shooting starts. Guess who that might be? You see, ladies and gentlemen, we're living in a time now where we really got to know who we are, what we are, where we live, and where we came from, or everything we think we know would confuse us. Even our own sociology, our own government, even our own religious convictions. When you don't know what you are a spirit. Who you are, you have a soul. Where you live in a body. Everything you think you know will confuse you. Because when you don't define yourself like God defines you, the devil would define you. So what you see happening, Brother Jackson, is so many points to your point there. What you see happening is people are reacting in pain, and they're tired of people being shot by just walking down the street. And so you got whites and blacks. What you see happening is, if we're not careful, there is a racial divide that will occur, that the only thing that can help us is we got to get people to start realizing how many people are operating out of old self-love. If you look at it, in most cases, that's what's driving all of this. We appreciate your point, Brother Jackson. We can talk about that more and maybe spend some more time on it. Okay, let's see. Somebody else made a comment here. Let's take comments. All right. Okay. I see Roz. I see Carolyn. I see Ali. I see Michelle. Ali Michelle is the same person. Jerry Graham makes a comment. He says he was talking about how what happens when a person's bank account is bankrupt. Okay. What Jerry responds to about what people said, listen to what he said about what's happening in our society. He says, good point. When you don't define yourself the way God defines you, the devil will define you. He says excellent. And there are a lot of people, ladies and gentlemen, who really don't know why they're doing what they're doing. All they know is that they are in pain. Then Johnny says something. Johnny Talton, she says, let's bring it up. She says, I have been doing lots of listening today. I like the last question. There's a lot of pain. You better believe it. And we're not talking about pain just now. We're talking about pain that goes way back in history. So you got now people are fed up. And so now you got riots in Chicago. You got riots in Los Angeles. You got riots in Minnesota. You got riots in various places all over the country because people are tired. They're sick and tired of saying, hey, listen, don't act like you don't know what's going on. And sometimes Anglos are in an awkward position because a lot of the Anglo people, white people, are not necessarily making those decisions. But what you cannot say, Anglo Americans, those who live in the White House, is that you don't see what's going on. You cannot deny what you saw with that police officer with his feet in the neck of that gentleman, and that man died. And so what we have to do now is turn every withdrawal into a deposit. Okay, now I got to make sure I don't become hostile myself. I got to make sure I don't become angry. I got to turn withdrawals into deposits, or the devil will use me and take advantage of me because of all this pain. That's a good point, Johnny. It's a lot of pain out here. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking for another comment. Anybody here? I see a lot of people here, and we're just taking comments. I got time for a few more comments. Anybody who would like to make a comment? Cora makes a comment. We'll look at that. She says, the pain from being broken. What does that mean? The pain from being broken. All that means is the pain from your old self being aggravated because of more pain. See, once you experience your first greatest pain, if you never address that first greatest pain, anything similar to that first greatest pain will come back and haunt you and cause you to begin to react to the first greatest pain. Jesus said it like this. He said, this people's heart has waxed cross, and their ears have become dull of hearing, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and be converted. In other words, when you have a pain that you never address, and that pain then is driving your behavior, when you have anything similar to that same pain, it causes that pain to be pushed down and repressed. And that's what Brother Jackson was talking about when he says feelings buried alive will rise again and haunt you. See, we need a tool so that we can handle our feelings, so that we can handle our thoughts, so we can handle our words. And that's where love deposits and love withdrawals plays a very important role. Ladies and gentlemen, you are learning how to live with God's love bank. It is a lifestyle of purpose. It is a system that helps you to learn how to live in purpose. Nate Davis says something here. Let's take his comment here. Nate says, yes, let me see if I can see this right. Yes, there is pain due to history of feeling abused, abandoned, and rejected. Nate, what you just identified is this is another level of God's love bank. Do you know that individuals have old self-love home bases, but cultures or ethnic groups also have home bases? And I would say to you, what do you think the African-American culture, the African-American ethnic group, what do you think their old self-love home base is? Hurry up, I only have a few minutes. Hurry up. Somebody tell me, what do you think the African-Americans' old self-love home base is and their first base? I'm waiting for a response here. Anybody? What do you think African Americans' old self-love home base is? Anybody? Okay, let's talk about it. And Nate brought up something that I think is real significant. First of all, African Americans' home base, Angie, she says it's abuse and worthlessness. Johnny says it's rejection. Kenan says it's abuse. Okay. Willie Smith says it's worthlessness. Nate Davis says it's abuse. Janet says it's rejection. Linda says it's abuse. Cora says it's abuse. Jerry says it's abuse. Okay, let's go back. Now look at the first greatest pain. Y'all remember the first greatest pain of Adam and Eve is when they were cast out of their home in the garden and they could not get back home. So they spent the rest of their days trying to get back home. And since they could not get back home, what happened was that became their first greatest pain. All right, now, whatever your first greatest pain is, that's how you begin to make assessment of what the home base is. Okay, here's Africans. They were in their own country. They were a highly sophisticated civilization. They were very wealthy. They had many things, but then they were stolen and betrayed by their own people, own Africans, betrayed them. They were stolen, put on a ship, shipped to America. And when they got to America, even before they got to America, they were treated with all types of injustices. I mean, whips. I mean, beat. They couldn't eat. They have ate. They have fed them. What would that be? I would say the home base is abuse. And then what they had to deal with from that point on, I got to wrap this up. What they had to deal with from there is when they got to United States, they were totally what? Rejected. So they had to feel what? Worthless. And ultimately, they really wanted to abandon, but they couldn't. So I would suggest that the home base of African-American people is abuse, with a first base of rejection, with a second base of worthlessness, and a third base of abandonment. And that's why you see African-American people responding the way that they respond. If their home base is abuse, they sabotage and blame. And when they get desperate, they project their abuse on other folk. Now, I got to close, but I can't close without just saying, what about Anglo-Americans' home base? You better believe it's abandonment. They disengage and deny, and sometimes will be dishonest about their own reality of what happened and what part they play in the process. I wish we had more time, ladies and gentlemen, but what we're trying to get you to see is that God's Love Bank is not only a framework of thinking, it's a program for living and a curriculum for teaching. So if you don't know what your old self-love home base is, go to godslovebank.com and do that assessment. You can also do it at oldselfnewself.com so that you can come to the table and have an understanding of what we're talking about when we continue. Without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I got to stop. We look forward to seeing you on Monday. Until then, our core value for this month is new self-purpose. The purpose God had in mind when he created me and you for his good, which gives us the capacity to find purpose and good in everything in our life, including our problems, including the pandemic, including what happened to African Americans in slavery, and including what happened to Anglo Americans who in some cases have been engulfed in this thing because they were not necessarily the ones who brought the slavery, but now there are some who's trying to perpetuate it. So we'll continue talking about this when we have another time. May God bless you. Live with purpose and passion, and we'll see you on Monday.